All right, just a couple caveats and housekeeping items before we get into our introductions and into the meat of this. We are not the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts. We are the regional planning agency and joined by a guest from the city of Boston. So we want to talk about this particular opportunity and give some general information on it and how it aligns with the type of planning work that we do at MAPC and projects that the city of Boston has done that have been funded by this program. But with any nitty-gritty questions about the NEA application process and eligibility requirements, we don't want to misrepresent anything. So we will direct you to the NEA for any specific questions on their process. And we have information about their upcoming July Q&A about specifically the Our Town grant, which we'd encourage you to attend if you have further questions. But the goal for today is to do an overview of the types of arts and culture planning projects that we do at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, how those align with the program goals of Our Town projects at the NEA funds, learn about examples of specific projects that have been funded by the Our Town program, and then look at some next steps and some timeline if you're interested in pursuing that grant opportunity or other potential arts and culture planning opportunities that you might work with MAPC. And again, use that Q&A function to post your questions. So to start us off, finally, I'll introduce myself. My name is Hannah Gathman. I'm the Senior Arts and Culture Planner at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. My background is in arts administration. I worked in museums for a while and then did some consulting on my own, working with nonprofits and municipalities on both arts programming as well as planning projects. And I've been at MAPC working for Greater Boston municipalities for about a year since last summer. And I will pass it over to Anis, who's also at MAPC.
Thanks, Hannah. Hi, everyone. My name is Anis Gupta. I'm the director of the Arts and Culture Department at MAPC. I've been here since 2017 when the department was launched, and I helped our founding director, Jen Erickson, to build the program to what it is today. I have a background in planning. I have a master's and a PhD in urban and regional planning with a focus on arts and culture, and have about 20 years experience doing arts and culture planning. And I will pass it to Cara. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Cara Elliott-Ortega. I'm the Chief of Arts and Culture with the City of Boston, and I oversee the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. Good to be here.
Thanks, Cara and Anis. So just a brief overview of what the Metropolitan Area Planning Council is. We are a regional planning council, a public agency in Massachusetts. We serve the 101 cities in town that make up Greater Boston. You'll see a map with very, very tiny city and town names there. That's the region we serve. We divide our region into 8 sub-regions, and we do a number of types of planning work agency-wide with our both individual municipalities, our own initiatives, and collaborative regional efforts that are multi-municipalities involved in the project. So you can see we do what most regional planning agencies do in land use and transportation, environmental planning, but we also have some more, what we would call more innovative sectors of planning focus areas, such as clean energy and public health, and then the arts and culture team, which as Anis mentioned, has been at MAPC since 2017, which makes us the newest focus area department practice area at MAPC. And with that, we'll talk a little bit, give some context about the type of arts and planning projects that we do at MAPC with specific past examples that we've done around the region. I'll hand it over to Anis.
Thanks, Hannah. I just want to note we do have an attendee with a raised hand, and I don't know if we want to just check in to make sure that, yeah, a couple folks. If you're able to put your comment or question in the Q&A, we would encourage you to do that. So at MAPC, we do a lot of different types of work. One of the big buckets that we work on is what we would consider cultural planning. And the way that we approach cultural planning is with a framework of people, place, and policy. So we really try to set up processes that help us identify and activate the artists and arts and culture stakeholders to be project advisors and to inform the work as participants. And then we work with the network to document the place-based assets that support local arts and culture and highlight needs and opportunities that could be addressed or leveraged through policy changes and programming. And the work can take many different forms, from municipal arts and culture action plans to public arts master plans to cultural district plans and many more. Next slide. We also have hosted 2 artists in residence at MAPC, and they both really helped to spark creative activities throughout the organization. What you see here is a walking play developed by our second artist in residence, Hortense Gerardo, as part of the Medfield Creative Placemaking Project. And we also helped the city of Beverly launch their artist residency program in the Beverly Arts District. Next slide. Another more recent area of practice that has been growing is in cultural facilities planning. We've been developing concept plans for Malden, and we're working on a similar project in Revere to really think about how to develop arts and culture facilities with municipally owned buildings. Next slide. We also do creative placemaking, and at MAPC, we define creative placemaking as a planning and community development process that occurs when planners, community development practitioners, artists, and others deliberately integrate arts and culture into community revitalization work, placing arts at the table with land use, transportation, economic development, education, housing, infrastructure, and public safety strategies. And our creative placemaking work really facilitates community conversations that guide a call for creative interventions that address those community priorities. Next slide. And then finally, we are really working to support public art making. We, through our work facilitating a call for permanent public art in Lynn, we collaborated with the Office of the Inspector General of Massachusetts to establish a process for commissioning public art using grant agreements as defined in Section 2 of Chapter 30B. And we have, for the last few years, been training municipalities across the state in this process through the Making It Public for Municipalities workshop series offered by the New England Foundation for the Arts. And applications for the 2024 cohort will open in August of this year. And all the text on all of those slides really was highlighting the ways that all of these different practice areas kind of connect in with the goals of the NEA Our Town program. So they label Our Town as a creative placemaking grant, and we kind of see many different activities as falling within that category. Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Annis. And with that, so a little bit more now about the Our Town grant. I'm sure many of you may be quite familiar with the NEA. Many of you may have never approached the NEA or received any NEA funding. So real quickly, the National Endowment for the Arts is an independent federal agency. It's been around since 1965, and it's currently the largest funder of arts and arts education programming in communities nationwide, and does do a lot of focus on partnerships, public and private partnership of the arts. And you'll see encourages a lot of partnerships in their grant making, and creates partnership agreements with state art agencies and regional art agencies. So again, we're talking quite a bit about the Our Town grant today. I wanted to just draw your attention that there are a couple other project-based grant opportunities that the NEA offers. Grants for art projects, which in terms of number of these grants they issue every year, that's going to be the most number, and they're very varied in size and scope. You can see ranging from $10,000 to $100,000. They issue that twice a year, so February and July. The Challenge America grant is geared toward first-time applicants or folks who, if you've applied, you haven't received any funding from any of these programs in the last 3 years. And it is designed to be more geared towards smaller organizations or communities. And that is, those are all $10,000 grants, and that deadline is in April. So if it seems like you're looking into these other things and Our Town maybe seems a little big in scope and a little, past what your bandwidth or, building up to what you're at right now, it might be worth looking into next year, preparing for a Challenge America grant. And then what we're looking at today is the Our Town grant, which now ranges from 25 to 150K. The first deadline for it is coming up on August 3rd. So if you're considering the Our Town grant for this year, you will, right about now is when you should be buckling down on these materials. So we'll talk a little bit more about that upcoming timeline. And just a note for all of these that all of these require a one-to-one match, which again, we'll talk about in a little bit more detail. But so if you're funded $50,000 for one of these, you need to also show where you're matching that $50,000 from other lines of funding or grants or in-kind personnel matches. So as Anna said, the way the Our Town grant is defined is as a creative placemaking initiative. But you'll see as we go through the example projects that have been funded with the City of Boston, as well as what the NEA lists as types of projects that are encouraged activities under Our Town, you will see that creative placemaking can really cover a lot of things. So those projects that Anna's just mentioned that MAPC has done with past municipalities, those are not necessarily Our Town programs, but they're examples of these types of cultural planning and public art making, creative cultural facilities that fall into this broader term the NEA uses as creative placemaking when defining the grant. And you can see, especially in these two paragraphs that are provided by the NEA, that this is a wide umbrella of the type of projects and plans and community activities that could be happening. And as I mentioned, partnerships are a big focus of NEA grants, the Our Town grant. It's also often an underscoring priority for the work that MAPC takes on as well, is working with other municipalities or organizations and partners within your community. So again, this is text from the NEA's Our Town program to demonstrate who we're trying to connect with whom and how we use this creative placemaking and cultural planning to also get at larger social issues. And I did want to just pull out the sentence to you verbally that the NEA notes that competitive projects are responsive to unique local conditions, authentically engage communities, center equity, advance artful lives, and lay the groundwork for long-term systems change. So they're kind of getting at that with this partnership summary as well. And then again, so I bring up all these lists of potential activities. These are listed by the NEA as eligible project activities that could be included in your proposal. So you'll see a lot of, we start right off the bat with artist residencies, which Anna's mentioned, Kara's going to mention in a minute as well. Cultural district planning, which we'll talk a bit about, but lots of different, design of cultural facilities. Again, it's sounding familiar. So this is a broad range of activities that could be included in a successful Our Town application. I'm going to hand it over to Kara at the City of Boston and let her tell us a little bit more about projects that they have done and that have been successfully funded through Our Town.
Thank you. So I'm going to just talk really quickly through these and hopefully gives a sense of some of what has been supported. We've been really excited to have 4 projects funded in Boston over the last 5 years. So we've also had applications rejected. So we've seen kind of both sides of that process. But just to dive in, these are 2 projects that have been definitely in the cultural planning and placekeeping work. So an NEA Our Town grant helps launch Boston's Latin Quarter Cultural District, and that was in partnership with a local organization called Hyde Square Task Force. And the Latin Quarter is a state-designated cultural district, so that's through the Massachusetts Cultural Council, focused on the preservation and celebration of Afro-Latinx culture in the Hyde Square area of Boston. And we wanted to work with them on a cultural district plan, and that's what we applied for, and we're able to work with MAPC on producing that and really creating a roadmap for what that district was going to work on and what their values were, how to think about, for an organization running a cultural district, what does it mean to add that as a scope of work on top of what they normally do as a nonprofit? And while the funding definitely supported some more kind of classic placemaking components as a part of that work, like public events or performances by Latinx artists or Spanish language programs, Some of that funding also really helped with the kind of community organizing around producing that plan and really informing what the cultural district was going to work on. So there was an advisory council that was staffed that helped direct all of that work and make sure that it was really community led. So that was also a big piece of that application that would have been hard to support otherwise. Similarly, the Little Saigon Cultural District is another state designated cultural district in Boston. It's focused on highlighting, recognizing and preserving Vietnamese American culture that has a long history in the Dorchester neighborhood of Boston. And some of the district's placekeeping activities were supported by this, including like addressing an alleyway that is really frequently used but didn't feel safe and was sort of underlit. And the district worked to install lighting and lanterns and really turn that path into more of a celebrated place that's kind of in the middle of the cultural district. They've also run an incredibly successful night market that highlights local businesses and Vietnamese cuisine and restaurants. So that application was more on the kind of programming and asset mapping side of the district, as opposed to creating kind of a final product that is like a documented plan with steps and outcomes, which is what the Latin Quarter created. So both of these projects work with predominantly immigrant communities, really see placemaking or placekeeping is what we tend to use as a cultural and social and political project. So really kind of hitting the point of these grants using arts and cultural interventions to achieve outcomes and other things like economic development. And I think in particular, because both of these are immigrant communities in places that are undergoing a lot of change, rising rents, gentrification. They also see the opportunity to highlight immigrant-run businesses and restaurants and market those areas as destinations. So they're also looking at this question of like generating local economic activity for these communities and residents. In addition to this idea of really having this solidified identity as hubs for these immigrant communities and cultures. In both cases, city partnership was really important. I think maybe more so with Boston Latin Quarter, because they were wrestling with and continue to wrestle with questions about owning and developing facilities, small business support, taking advantage of development projects that are coming to the area, finding more public space to do events, just like a lot of issues that continue to require the city's participation in finding solutions or navigating city process or even some political strategy. And so we are very involved in both, but I think in particular, the application with the Latin Quarter was one where the city was really involved in writing that and thinking about what those outcomes are for the city as well. Go to the next slide. These two are a little bit less of kind of what we might think of as placemaking. Our town actually helped us launch our Artists in Residence program at City Hall. I think it was our first NEA Our Town grant, actually. This is a program where we partner with local artists, and we actually place the local artists in partnership with city departments and offices in City Hall. So this is not a traditional kind of artistic residency, but it's really about putting social or civic practice artists in dialogue with city work, where city staff and artists co-design projects over the course of a year. So one example from this year is that we have a dancer, Ashton Lights or Stiggity Sachs, who's partnered with our parks department, and his work is about highlighting how parks serve as dance venues for the development of local dance styles and local artists, really showing how public spaces are a critical part of social and cultural infrastructure in the city. And he's actually working with a local organization now called Design Studio for Social Intervention, which is asking the question, what if we had courts for dance the same way that we have courts for basketball? And so Stiggity is supporting a series of events called Dance Court coming out of that program. So from a city perspective, this kind of advances our understanding of the role that parks can really play in social resilience and in cultural life, and really expands our idea of like what equitable parks infrastructure might look like, right? Like we could actually imagine a future a year or two from now where a capital project for a park in the city of Boston includes like dance infrastructure. So that grant from the NEA helped launch this program. This is like at the time would have been a very experimental, maybe from like a municipal perspective, kind of risky, strange sounding program because it didn't exist and we hadn't tried it yet. So this money really helped us to try it, to pilot it. And then based off of the success of that, we were able to move that program onto our city operating budget. So this is now kind of a landmark program of ours that's many, many years strong. And then this last one, this music workforce program, this is our most recent NEA Our Town in Boston from the past year. So the program activities are still going on right now. And this was in partnership with Community Music Center of Boston. And this is probably the one that we've been the least involved in as a municipality. So they were the primary applicant, and they convened 7 other organizations to hire youth to receive arts sector workforce training, work in each of the organizations, get mentorship, and are being compensated to produce their own self-directed projects in the arts. So we applied for this, or CMCB applied for this with our support a year earlier, and were rejected, and went back and asked for feedback. Were encouraged to reapply, and then received the grant. And this is one, like I said, where we have been not very involved. We're actually plugging back into this project now, and it's more than halfway done, I think. And we're excited to hear about the outcomes and the learnings. But for us, it's more from the city perspective, it's more about, again, kind of seeing, is this a pilot program that could be scaled? Is it a model for how we might do creative youth development work, or kind of think about workforce training differently in the arts? But Community Music Center of Boston, as the lead applicant, is a very well-established arts organization. They know what they're doing. They've been directing the day-to-day of that program. So I think I'll stop there, although with some apologies, because I'm glossing over the work of many, many other people and other organizations and many, many partners. So there's a lot of specifics here that I'm not talking about. If you're curious about the details of any of these, I would definitely recommend looking at everybody's websites, and happy to drop some of that in the chat as well.
And Cara, a couple follow-up. I think you're going to talk about the matching funds in a minute for the projects that you have applied for and received. We also have a question that, are the Boston cultural districts you mentioned, are they incorporated nonprofit organizations, or are they part of the city? I'll just back up.
Yeah, the cultural districts are managed by independent 501c3 nonprofits. In partnership with the city. So we have a memorandum of agreement with each of them about what that means. And that is also a requirement, I think, that we have that partnership documented through an MOA. I think that's a requirement of the Mass Cultural Council. So there is a designated managing entity for the district. And then in terms of matching funds, particularly if it's something that we're going to be working on as a staff from the municipality, we always start with looking at our own salaries and that in-kind match. So any work that we're going to be doing on this, so it's the first thing that we put into the NEA budget, is a % of the salaries of any city staff we're going to be working on it. And then in the case of, I think for both of these cultural districts, they do receive a grant from us every year. And so that would have counted towards the match as well. I'm trying to think if there's other sources other than grants. They've also done their independent fundraising. They've also counted their own staff times towards this as well, the organization. So there's a lot of actually just like personnel time that goes into that match for each of these.
Thanks, Cara. And one clarifying question, because you had mentioned that the Artist in Residence program became actually like a line item in the city budget, and it has been going now. It's kind of a signature program in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture. Could you just clarify, did the Our Town program fund the first year of that just for 1 year, or did you subsequently apply for further grants from the NEA for it?
It just funded the first year, and after that first year, we moved it onto our operating budget.
Great, thank you. All right, I'm gonna move us forward. So this gets at a couple of things we've already mentioned, but the partnership is a big piece, underlying condition of this grant, and I think important to these projects' success in general. So the lead applicant can be a municipality or a 501c3 nonprofit, and then has to have a partner organization as well. Something that's new this year is that a 501c3 can apply as the lead applicant with a quasi-governmental entity as their partner, as their like co-applicant. So as opposed to just the local government, it could be something like a regional planning agency. They also mention libraries or They have a couple other examples on their website. They're all things that you would think of as they are government entities, but it's a little bit wider than just a local government municipality starting this year. And like Cara mentioned, often, those cultural districts are a good example of the 501 partner is the organization that now is the, administers that cultural district moving forward. Which isn't necessarily a requirement, but often just that makes sense of how the project would be set up. And then again, in terms of the match, so you can request between 25K and 150K. You definitely have, those are hard minimums and maximums. Don't ask for less than that. Don't ask for more than that. And that because the one-to-one match is required, that does imply that so that your total project budget needs to be between 50 and 300 to indicate that there's the match going on, or it could be over 300 if you have more than that match. And as Cara mentioned, do think about your personnel and in-kind costs and your billable hours and the amount of staff time that will be going towards these projects, because in all likelihood, it is probably quite a bit. And that match can be a combination of, it can be direct costs and cash donations, and or a combination of that with the in-kind support. All right, and I did see just a couple questions pop up, which I know Annis is doing a good job of answering, but individuals are not eligible to apply. You need to be 501c3 or a government entity to be that lead applicant, and then bring on one of the others as your co-applicant. And I did not mean, I may have misspoke, but I didn't mean that a private entity is required to be one of your co-applicants. That's not a requirement of this program, but just what I meant more by that was that these programs are made partly to just encourage wider collaboration across communities, and that often may include, in addition to these types of required partners, that may include private partnerships or private investment as well. And then volunteer hours as in-kind support. I don't think so. Don't quote me directly on that, on what the NEA would classify, but generally without having, an estimated billable wage, you wouldn't be able to document that as an in-kind amount. So I think, but again, I would encourage you, if that would be an integral piece of your application, could make a big difference. I would encourage you to ask the NEA that question specifically, because I do see a couple people have asked that. And then the timeline for achieving the one-to-one match, that should be you should demonstrate how it will be achieved during the length of the project. I did drop a couple answers in the Q&A which we can put in the chat too, which is the NEA's timeline of when these projects need to happen. But you need to indicate where that match is coming from at the beginning when you are creating the application. I'm just going to stick that timeline in the chat because I saw we had a number of questions about it. So I'll add that in a second. I know we have more questions. I'm gonna get us to just a question period and just wrap up these slides. So we'll have plenty of time to answer questions. But speaking of timeline, this is the upcoming dates. So there's two different portals. So grants.gov, which is the big federal portal, materials have to be submitted there by August 3rd. And then the NEA specific application portal opens on the 10th. So everything needs to be ready by the 3rd to submit. The earliest time people hear from the NEA for them notifying of what this round's awards will be is in the spring, in April of next year, and the projects can't start prior to July 1. Of next year, and that is a maximum 2-year project timeline. Anything you will need to submit a project budget with the application. Any costs that are incurred prior to that July 1 date, 2024, are not eligible for them to cover. So make sure that those aren't anything that would happen before July 1 isn't a part of that budget that they need to see the minimum and maximum requirements. And then to close the loop here, I'm going to leave this up while we take questions. As I mentioned, there is a Q&A that the NEA is hosting from our town. And I definitely encourage folks who are interested in this specific grant to attend that. They're really thorough, and they generally, they will post results to that after the webinar. So that link to register is there. And then you can contact us directly if you're wondering about a project idea you have. MAPC is available. I will say that you would need to be in the MAPC region. I think that Annis has dropped some answers, but I'll let her speak for a moment too. If you fall outside of the MAPC service area, what resources might be in your region. But if you're within the MAPC service area of Greater Boston, we are here and have funding available on our end to cover our time to help you with things like project ideation, what might make sense for your community, what might also align with the NEA, our town program. If you would like advice on the application, if you'd like to name MAPC Arts and Culture as a named project partner, that's something we definitely like to talk about and want to talk about, but make sure we do very much sooner rather than later. If you'd want to actually have us as a co-op applicant, that's a potential, and it's something we can talk to individual municipalities about if it's a project that aligns with our work plan and bandwidth and the priorities of the Arts and Culture Department. But even without being that named partner, happy to talk through your project ideas. And I'll also add that even if the NEA, if these grant programs are not looking like they're in the cards for you this year, but you have project ideas that you're interested in talking about with MAPC, you saw just a sample of the range of arts and culture planning projects we do. We'd love to talk to you. Again, if you're in the MAPC region, we would really love to hear your ideas and see if there's any way that MAPC can slot in and help with those projects. And that could be via grant funding that you seek on your own, such as federal grant. It could be other grant opportunities you find as a city. MAPC also offers technical assistance to municipalities in our region to fund planning projects, including arts and culture planning projects. So we encourage you to ask us about that if that's something that would make a cultural planning project possible in your city or town. And then, as I mentioned at the top, we will be including the recording of this webinar as well as this slide deck on our website, which you see here, which includes a few other federal funding resources for not just arts and culture, but a few other different planning practice areas. So that will be up next week. So check back to that website. I want to just check with Annis if you had anything to add about, I know I saw a couple of questions about folks outside of the MAPC region.
So there are 13 regional planning agencies that cover all of the geography of Massachusetts, and I included a link to the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies website in the answers to a few of those questions. That will give you a map and help you identify the regional planning agency that serves your area. If you'd like help finding the right person to talk to, we're always happy to help, and you can definitely feel free to reach out to us, and we will get you in touch with the right folks.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go to our open Q&A. See what we have. I think that actually I missed this. This was a question for Cara as she was wrapping up, is who is the lead in writing each of those grants? And I know a couple were City of Boston initiated.
Yeah, we were the lead applicant, I believe, on Latin Quarter, Little Saigon, and the Artist in Residence program. And the only reason I have a question mark in my voice is because for both of the cultural district applications, we co-authored them. And I think this is something that kind of depends on the project and depends on you know, what you're trying to get out of it or what the partner is trying to get out of it. In some cases, we've been really involved in drafting the application responses. And because we are a local arts agency and an arts office, we can qualify as the primary applicant because we have those 3 years of artistic programming. So in many cases, it could go either way. Like we could be the lead applicant or our arts partner organization could be the lead applicant. And then we also co-author, in many cases, the actual application and work together on them. But I believe that we formally submitted those 3. Whereas in the Community Music Center of Boston case, they submitted that directly and just had a letter of support from us as the municipality. And I don't know if everybody was clear on that there's a required partnership with the municipality or with some sort of government agency. So if you're on the creative arts side or an artist or you have an art project and you're not that government agency, I think the first step is to, in many cases, to reach out to your local municipality and start to figure out like what that partnership would be or what their process is for selecting partners for this grant. And just while I'm just going to keep talking. Also for folks who just have an arts project where the product is like a mural or a piece of public art, I think that this is just my personal opinion. I think that in order for those to be competitive for this fund in particular, there has to be like some kind of cross-sector collaboration, or you have to be able to describe how that's going to influence something outside of just creating that arts project, right? So is that like helping make an economic development case for something? Is that also about youth employment? Like what is the other kind of arts and thing that you're influencing or that there will be outcomes in outside of just creating that arts product? Because there are other kinds of grants, including NEA project grants, that could support something where the artistic product is the final thing, and that is what those grants are for. This has to have some sort of outcome in another area that's not just in the arts or creating an artistic product. So just in case people are trying to find the right match for what they're trying to do.
Thanks, Cara. I'm going to start going through. We have a number of open questions. Do we know of any additional funding sources along with the NEA that could fund a public art project? They applied for Bloomberg, but didn't make it to the final stage. Curious if we know any other potential resources. And I will add that I think Anna's put an answer. The New England Foundation for the Arts will be, as we mentioned, opening the 3rd year of the Making It Public series, which is a training program for municipalities to operate public art making programs in their municipalities. And it culminates with a $15,000 grant from NEFA to put into place a temporary public art project in your city or town. And that program is run in coordination with our department, with the MAPC Arts and Culture team, who will be doing the curriculum for it next year. So that application will open in August. Anna or Cara, I don't know if you want to put in the chat or pipe up if you have any other suggestions about public art funding opportunities.
I would just say that in what we've seen in municipalities that we work with outside of Boston is that these programs are often put together through a combination of sponsorships from local businesses, contributions from local banks, some amount of municipal funding, sometimes from local cultural councils. There are a lot of different sort of small pots of funding that often come together. And then in addition to the Mass Cultural Council grants for artists and New England Foundation for the Arts grant for artists programs, there's also the Commonwealth Places program that's run through Mass Development, which allows for uses patronicity to do crowdsourcing for projects that activate the public realm through creative placemaking. So that's another program to be aware of. That one also would require some level of partnership. It's not so much directed just at one artist's project concept. Or I don't know other thoughts.
I'm going to see if, because I know this hand has been raised for a while, Jennifer Leonard Solis, if you have a question and maybe can't use the type function, do you want to ask it on here via microphone? Okay, I'm gonna say that might be an accidental hand raise. And Okay, and then one other, if some folks aren't able to access the chat or Q&A, Alice, do you have a question you wanted to ask on here?
No, all set. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so moving on through the questions in the Q&A. Someone asks, if I'm an individual artist who wants to apply for this funding, do you recommend I connect with an organization to be eligible? These seem geared toward organizations rather than individuals. That is correct. These are definitely geared towards organizations and government entities, municipalities, rather than individuals. Depending on the project, if it's something that a local 501 and then a government entity in town are excited about and want to lead the application on, that's something that they could do. But for the most part, projects led by individual artists are not the focus of the Our Town grant. And then someone asked, this year we launched a collaborative project with a local government risk prevention network. Does the Our Town program have to be new, or can the grant be an expansion evolution of the program? This is an example of, I am not the NEA, so I am not the end-all answer on this. I encourage you to ask the NEA for some guidance on that question. I will say that in the program criteria, it's specific to the amount of explaining how you're adding new partnerships, new programming, new outcomes. So my guess is that there is a case to be made that a program that already has started is with this funding could add new outcomes, new partnerships, new programming. But again, I would recommend specific NEA guidance on that question. Let's see, where can we find out more information on the other grants mentioned earlier? I know that we mentioned the NEA's art project grants and the Challenge America grant. So we can drop that link in there. And I think then we mentioned the New England Foundation for the Arts, Making It Public program. That information is not yet live for 2024, as we're just wrapping the 2023 program right now, but that can and will be found at nefa.org, nefa.org. I think those are the only other grants that we've talked about. Can we match funds with ARPA funds? I was trying to find the answer to this. Annis or Cara, do you happen to know the answer to that?
I don't know the official answer, but I don't know why not. I don't know why that would be not allowed, but I can't speak on behalf of the NEA.
That was my take too. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to use those funds. But I can't say written in stone. Can the links in the chat be emailed after this webinar, please? Yes, at the very least, all of this with the links will be posted on our website that's listed at the bottom of this slide, the federal funding resources. And ideally, we will send it out as well to the folks who registered for the webinar. And I'm curious if funding could support personnel. We have a cultural plan that MAPC did that we'd like to implement, but would need a new staff member to do that. And the answer is yes on that. This program can cover staffing costs to at least the chunk of that staffing position that is implementing the project that you're applying for.
I would also add that we would be happy to chat with folks who are trying to figure out how to staff this work through personnel. We did an arts and culture staffing study, and we're working with our municipal collaboration team to think about kind of opportunities to share job descriptions or best practices or shared staff across multiple municipalities as a way to help get some of this work staffed. So feel free to reach out on that question too.
How common is it for a nonprofit to write a grant versus a municipality? I don't have the stats on that, but there's a lot of these awards that come into either a 501 or the municipality as the lead applicant.
The only very old feedback I can give on that is I know that there was an application for the original Beverly Arts District, which that plan was supported by an Our Town grant, and the initial applicant was a Main Streets district whose operating budget was lower than the amount that they were asking for in the grant. And that was flagged as potentially problematic. So there may be some thinking about who the lead applicant would be, the one that's really like handling the funding. And so just figuring out within the partnership who would make the most sense to have in that role.
Here's the question is, we're at the Arlington International Film Festival and want to know if we can apply. So if the Arlington International Film Festival is a 501c3, you could apply with a partner applicant who is a government or quasi-government entity, such as Arlington. This is just my personal opinion. I would encourage you to look at the project, the arts project-based grant that the NEA offers, as it might be a little bit tighter alignment with a film festival. But you know, just again, reiterating what Cara said a bit about is that the Our Town grant really is looking to achieve new, you know, broader community outcomes, like mentioning workforce development, economic development. So you know, look at the different couple grants that the NEA is currently offering and figure out which one might be the best fit for that.
Yeah, and I would add, just because I see there's another question about cultural festivals. We just had in Boston, BAMS Fest last weekend, big outdoor music festival that's free and open to the public. And they partnered with the Art of Mass Gatherings, which is a national organization, I believe. And their whole thing is how are events, public events and public festivals and gatherings actually really important resilience moments in communities. And they actually work with emergency management groups and offices and like train community members and like really think about like emergency response as a part of that. So there's all sorts of ways, I think, to take something that is like a big public festival and think about how it could be like a testing ground for like a new way of thinking about you know, what those events mean for communities and how they could increase community resiliency, right? Like that, I think that's the kind of thing that would take it into like an Our Town direction. Just Cara's random thoughts about that.
Thanks, Cara. That's a good perspective. Someone asks, this is a little bit nitty gritty on the application process, but for the arts project grant, does the July 6th deadline to submit mean that a complete application is due? Or what portion is due from July 11th to July 18th? Again, I won't let myself speak to the really nitty gritty of the NEA application portals, but you should plan to have everything by that first deadline, because you need to upload pretty much everything to the grants.gov and then go through some more specificity with the NEA portal. Cara, I don't know if that general answer aligns with your experience.
Yeah, I would just flag that. Oh, I see. That's for the project grants, not for Our Town. I was gonna say the deadlines for Our Town, the application opens August 3rd. And my memory of that process is that the initial application is literally like the name of the project. And then once the full portal opens, you have just that, you know, whatever it is, 2 weeks or 3 weeks to then put all of your application materials in there. And it is like a heavy lift for Our Town. There's like a lot to do in there. So I think working on everything earlier is definitely my advice, but it is kind of like a timed access that you have to the portal. But the deadlines for Our Town, the first part is August 3rd, and then the full application opens August 10th through 17th.
Thank you. And I saw Annis dropped some text from NEA into that answer. And then someone asks, in defining culture, are other kinds of cultural expression possible beyond visual and performing arts? Specifically, is cuisine something that makes sense for this funding mechanism? I would certainly, the age-old question is, what is culture? I don't know that we can definitively answer it on this chat today, but I would encourage you to explain how, you know, a project you have in mind that is cuisine based is culture, because I think that's a pretty, depending on the project, that's a pretty easy case to make, how cuisine and food are big pieces of culture. in many, many, many communities. I don't know, Cara, if you've had any experience with any cuisine or food related projects out of your office.
No, I mean, I think the Little Saigon Cultural District, a lot of the cultural assets are restaurants that are small businesses. And that's a big part of the narrative that's a part of the cultural identity of that place. So I think it's worth making the case. And it's probably a good question for them about what they would be looking to ensure that there's that eligibility. But I think if you're working as a nonprofit for the public benefit, and it just so happens that the cultural component is cuisine, I think that's definitely a case worth making.
Someone asks, though the NEA will not repeatedly fund the same project, are projects that occur annually typically viewed more favorably than a one-off program? I'm not an NEA grant reviewer, so this is not me saying what the NEA will view more favorably. But me, Hannah, would say no, there isn't necessarily a connection between strength of the application and if it's a one-off or annual event. I think, showing that something is building capacity and building partnerships for, future community involvement is something that makes a stronger case. Cara, what would you say to that?
We framed at least half of ours as pilots or as testing or as potential models. I think as long as the learnings and the are helping you think about some systems change or larger scale change, then that's more important than whether it's an ongoing program or not for this grant.
Yeah, I dropped the language from the website that highlights that they're really looking for this to lay the groundwork for long-term systems change. And so that's the case that you're trying to make. And if the fact that you intend for it to be an ongoing program is part of that kind of theory of how that change happens, probably worth putting it in there, just knowing that you're not going to get another round of funding for that same program.
Thank you. And then I just saw a follow-up from our friend in Arlington, adding that they're planning to do a filmmakers residency with high school filmmakers for the 2024 festival. And I think that's a great example of kind of showing how a program that could be, here's an event we're doing, and then also here's another piece that might, again, get at what we're talking about, creating these long-term systems change. If we're creating more of a pipeline for filmmaking education, I'm spitballing here, obviously, but yes, I could see that making it being a component that might make it a stronger case for an Our Town grant. Again, that's me, Hannah, saying that, not being someone who will be reviewing Our Town applications. I will say too that in addition to attending, this webinar that the NEA is doing, get in touch with them. I mean, I'm probably speaking to the choir here, but anytime you can reach out ahead of time to float an idea and see if a funder or grant maker thinks it's a good fit or not, you can save yourself so much time. If they're generally pretty good about saying when, no, that's not the right fit for this, think about this other thing, or think about next year. My personal opinion is when they give that sort of guidance, listen and don't get too deep into something that might just not really be aligned with what they're picturing. All right, I think we got through all the questions in the Q&A. So last call for any of those. Again, we will definitely post everything on our federal funding page for MAPC. All the links, the deck, and the recording of the webinar. My email, hgaffman@mapc.org, is up here on the slide, and I'll drop it in the chat as well. And yeah, Annis.
Just one thing I wanted to highlight, because it felt like it maybe got a little bit muddled, but the partnership requirements for the Our Town grant are that you have to have some type of government partner, which is a little bit more expansive now than it was previously, and you need to have a 501c3 partner. So it is an organization and government partnership that can include other groups, but that's kind of the core of what needs to be part of the application.
Thank you. Yeah, that is pretty straightforward in terms of the requirements of this application from the NEA. All right, well, not seeing any other questions, I think we will leave it there. I'm just again dropping my email address in the chat, as well as that link to which currently does not have these materials, but next week after the 4th of July holiday, we will have these materials from this webinar posted online for you to print or share or reference. Well, thank you all for attending today. Had a really nice turnout. I'm glad this was of interest, and I hope folks can make some time to attend that July 20th Q&A if you want to hear directly from the NEA and get some of those nitty-gritty questions answered about their application process and their selection criteria. And thank you for the thank you in the chat. Thanks so much, all. Have a good rest of your afternoon.